Okay, so I decided to somewhat torture myself with the task of doing a video where I'm gonna tell you if I could only keep one palette from each brand in my collection, what would that palette be? Now, if you know my love for eyeshadow palettes, you know this is a hard one for me, okay? I want to keep them all. But I went through my collection. I picked out brands that I have at least 2 palettes from, obviously. Another stipulation for this video is I'm not including palettes that I am currently testing. And I am pre-filming this quite far ahead of time, so if my palette ranking video comes up before this video, which I think it will, I'm probably not going to include those palettes in this ranking because at this moment, I haven't fully tested the palettes. I hope that makes sense. These are only palettes that I've really tested. I have my full thoughts on. If you are new here, welcome. My name is Rachel, and if you're not new here, thank you so much for coming back. I have done this video in the past, but it's been quite a while, so I wanted to do an updated version, and I did see Nikki Raven recently do this video. I will link Nikki's video down below in the description box, as well as all the palettes I'm talking about if they are still available. Many of them aren't, I'm gonna be honest with you. Let's get to talking about the palettes in my collection I would keep if I was forced to only keep one from each brand. Now, surprisingly, there's not a ton of brands that I have at least 2 palettes from. There's a lot of brands I have only 1 palette from, which I thought was interesting. And I did recently do a palette declutter a couple months ago, so that might be why as well, but I'm gonna go in alphabetical order. So I'm gonna start off with Adept Cosmetics. I do have 2 palettes from Adept, and the one that I would be keeping is the Heather Austin palette. I really love this palette. I've talked about this so many times on my channel at this point. I think you guys know how I feel. These shimmers are out of this world. Out of this world. Unlike any other shimmers I've ever used. They're ultra sparkly. Some of them are multi-chromes. They're almost like a cream eyeshadow. They're so emollient, and they just look like chrome on your eyelids. If you are looking for a really impactful shimmer, and you just want more sparkle, you want more shine, this is your palette. I also really like the colors that she chose for the mattes, but in my opinion, the star of the show are these shimmers, and these would be great to pair with any of the palettes that I've kind of curated this other tiny collection that I have for myself with only choosing 1 palette from each brand. These would be my go-to shimmers for sure. Now, the next brand, I picked 2, and I'll tell you why. It's Anastasia Beverly Hills, and the one that I would pick is the ABH Norvina. Now, I don't know if this is technically considered Anastasia. I'm considering it Anastasia. This is the one that I would keep. This is one of my favorite palettes in my collection. The color story is just beautiful. I love neutrals. I love purples. That's what you're getting in this palette. When I first looked at this, I thought it was really just a straight up purple palette. And don't get me wrong, there's a lot of purples in here, but there's also a lot of neutrals, more like really true neutrals. You got some pinky neutrals. You've got really beautiful pops of color. The quality of these shadows are so stunningly beautiful. You get a huge mirror. This feels very heavy, very sturdy. It is plastic, which isn't like my favorite thing. Really beautiful palette. I'd be really upset if I had to get rid of this palette. So to me, this was definitely a clear choice for me to keep this one. Like, if people don't consider that ABH, my next choice would be the Jackie Aina palette. This is the one of like true ABH that I would choose. This is my favorite color story of the ones that I have. I think it's so unique, it's so saturated, it's so just really well done, and to this day, very unique in my collection. I really love the quality of these shadows. They're that usual good ABH, pigmented but very powdery matte, really beautiful, kind of traditional shimmers that are still really beautiful. So love this palette. Would definitely want to keep this one as well. The next brand is BH Cosmetics, and this is an easy one for me. Some of these were easy. Like, some of the brands I was like, oh, definitely that's the one I would choose. Other brands, not so much. This one, easy. Optimistic AF. Hands down, this is my favorite palette from BH that I own. First of all, this color story is everything. It's everything. It's warm neutrals with oranges, with yellows, and the quality of these shadows is so good. I did try this for the first time last year, and I put it, I think, like in the early teens, like 13, 14, something like that. And after going through and watching the video, I kind of felt like, and even said it while I was filming the video, I feel like this should have gone closer to the front. I feel like it should have been in the top 10 because If you told me this was not BH and you told me it was some high-end brand, I would completely believe you. The mattes are just that perfect pigment, not overly pigmented, blendable, and still really true to pan. These shimmers are just really shiny, really smooth, just gorgeous. I love that you have this very, very, very light shimmer for the inner corner. Really gorgeous. Love this palette so much. Definitely would be keeping this one. This is another one that was a no-brainer for me. This came in the top 5 palettes I tried last year. Blend Bunny Blends palette. So this is my go-to matte palette. It's got every matte that I could possibly need, and I know that these mattes are gonna perform perfectly. If I have a palette where I'm missing a shade, I grab for this one. Anytime I need a matte white, I grab for this one. It's just the thing that I keep very close by me to just grab as a complimentary palette. And I think this with the Heather Austin palette would be amazing as like a little duo with the shimmers that are in this and the mattes that are in this. Hands down, this would be the one I would keep without a doubt. I could have this and maybe a couple other palettes and probably be satisfied, probably. No, I want to keep them all. ColourPop was one that I had a little hard time choosing, but ultimately I chose Limoncello. This is one of my favorite neutral palettes in my collection, and I love neutrals. And that was another reason why, like, as I was going through this collection, I didn't keep a ton of neutral palettes, and so I wanted to keep this one. It was between this and the Star Wars palette, but I feel like this is summer in a palette for me. Like, I just want to be roaming the streets of Italy in summer with like a white eyelet dress and a basket. You know, it's not a revolutionary palette, but it is beautiful and soft and summery and a neutral palette with a little bit of a twist. The shimmers in here are not sparkly, not in your face, but still very, very pretty. They're just really shiny and they give you something without being textured, because I don't want like a super sparkly textured shade all the time. Sometimes I just want something that's still really pretty and gives you something. Love this palette so much. Dominique Cosmetics. Again, this one was pretty easy for me. I chose the Berries and Creme palette. I love this palette. I think it's really, really, really well done. I don't think all of her palettes are created equal. I've owned quite a few of her palettes and I've decluttered quite a few because sometimes the quality is not there. Sometimes the mattes are really, really, really lightly pigmented to the point where they're really not building up. Sometimes the shimmers are very dry, almost like they've expired. But I feel like every single shade in this palette I really like. And it's mostly mattes. We have this whole top row apart from this first one, and these 3 are all mattes. Then you have 3 shimmers, and then you have a matte with sparkle in it. I love the different colors that you get in this. You can create a beautiful berry look, and I think the quality of all these shadows are really, really nice. I've enjoyed this a lot. I haven't used it in a while, but this would be the one I would keep. So Glam Light, I chose the Berrylicious palette. At this moment in time, I've only tried and really reviewed and tested 2 of Glam Light's palettes. This one and the Dirty Martini palette. And I would choose this one. I like the Dirty Martini palette, but this one just quality-wise, I think is 3 steps higher. I think the pinks and the reds are really nice. The mattes are extremely pigmented, almost like kind of too pigmented. So you have to be a little bit careful with it if you don't want a bunch of pigment off the bat. The shimmers in this though are so beautiful, very sparkly, very impactful. Some of them are duochromes. My favorite part of this palette is the middle row, the greens. I love these greens. I think they're so gorgeous. And all 3 of these green shimmers are very different green shimmers. Beautiful. Love it. Next up, we have Juvia's Place. I don't have too many palettes from Juvia's Place anymore. I used to have a lot more. The one that I chose is the Bronzed Rustic palette because I wanted a little palette. I didn't have a ton of small, like 6-pan and smaller palettes, and I love to have these if I'm traveling or I just want to create a look and not have to really think. I can just grab something like this. My whole look is there. I really like this one as well for summer. We have those more warm, fiery tones. I really like the 2 shimmers in there. They're the usual really nice Juvia's Place shimmers where they're more traditional but very wet looking on the eyes. And I like all 4 of these mattes. They differ in depth and in color. And so I like this one a lot and I would keep this one. Okay, Natasha Denona is up next. And for Natasha Denona, I recently did a Natasha Denona ranking video where I ranked all of the palettes that I have from the brand. I can link that one down below. And the one that I'm choosing is not the one that came in #1. I wanted to say this in the beginning, but I forgot. It's not necessarily that it's my favorite palette from each brand. It's this collection that I'm curating. What do I feel like I need if I'm going to have a small collection? What palette can bring something different to the table? So for me, that would be the Mini Star. This one, I mean, I did say in that video, spoiler alert, that this could be #1 because I do love it very, very much. Like, it's interchangeable with #1. I feel like the looks I get with this are just so unique, unlike any other looks that I get from any other palette. They're true neutrals, but very interesting neutrals. You've got these two beautiful neutral mattes that blend like a dream. You have a more traditional just brown lid shade. You have more of a green leaning neutral. And then you have a brown to blue duochrome, which you see a lot. But I love smudging this on my lower lash line. And I love Natasha Denona Minis. They are my favorite and most preferred version of her eyeshadows. So I would definitely want to keep one of the minis. And this is my favorite mini. Nomad is up next. This one was a no-brainer for me. I decided to keep the Haunted Europe palette. #1, because it's no longer available. So if this were to be taken from my collection, I would be heartbroken, to be honest with you. So that's partly why. And then also because I just love this as a neutral palette with a twist. Because it does, of course, have those neutral tones, but then you've got greens, you've got red, purple, more cool tone neutrals. I love the whole theming of this palette. I love the more smoky tones. I love it. These are more buildable formulas, like the mattes are more buildable. The shimmers are really pretty, but they're not like ultra sparkly, ultra in your face, but still very beautiful. You can't get it anymore, so I won't go on and on, but this is definitely the one I would keep. And actually on my birthday, I kind of let myself choose any palette from my collection to use on my eyes for my birthday, and this is the palette I chose. Out of all the palettes, I own a lot of palettes. And this is the one I said, this is the one I want to play with. So I'm ultra drawn to it. Oden's Eye. This is the one that was the hardest for me because my two favorite palettes from the brand, I could not decide between them. I couldn't. I was almost going to bring both of them on camera and just not choose. But then I was literally picturing like if someone had a gun to my head and was forcing me to choose, which one would I choose? I had to literally picture that situation in order to choose. And I chose the Christmas Eve palette. I chose it because of how unique and beautiful it is. I think it is so, just looking at it is so beautiful. I think the color story is unlike anything else I've seen from the brand and really very unique in general. I don't feel like I have a palette like this, and that's why I chose it to go with everything that I've got, because the second palette, runner up to this that I was going to choose is a neutral palette. So I thought, I've got a couple of neutral palettes already. This one's very unique to my collection. This one's very unique to this little curated collection. And so this is the one I chose. Formula is 10 out of 10. Color story, 10 out of 10. You can't get it anymore, so I'm not gonna go on and on, but it's the one I would choose. Next up, we have Pat McGrath. I only own 2 palettes from Pat McGrath. I'm gonna be honest with you, I'm not a huge Pat McGrath eyeshadow fan. Don't unsubscribe. I just feel like they're very pricey, and I just don't want to spend that money on the shadows because they don't really, in my opinion, for my collection and my preference, I don't think they're worth the money. But I had to choose. So I chose the Mthership Mega Celestial Odyssey. So this was the holiday palette for 2021. I like this palette. I think it's nice. It's very shimmer heavy, which isn't my favorite thing in the whole world, but I think the shimmers are very pretty. None of these shimmers are the Blitz Astral formula, that special sparkly formula. They're traditional shimmers, but there's no denying they're very pretty. They're very, very creamy, very smooth, but impactful. There's only 4 mattes in here, and they're neutral mattes, which I like. I like neutral mattes. I'm not gonna complain about the neutral mattes. This is a nice palette. I like it, and I like it over the other one that I have. I would be keeping this one. Next up, I have Patrick Ta, and I chose the Major Dimension 2, the Rose palette, the one that came out last year. I have both of his palettes. I prefer this one for the color story. Again, I think it's a little more unique to what's going on in front of me. I don't really have a pinky rose toned palette that I can pull from for this curated collection. And I think he stepped his quality up a couple notches when he made this over the first eyeshadow palette. I like how the mattes go from light to deep and they're ultra buttery smooth, which I feel like in the first palette, they were very good. The shimmers here, I think, have improved. They're not as dry, but they're still piecey, sparkly textured. They're not like ultra smooth like the Pat McGrath ones are. These are a little bit more light catching, interesting, different, really pretty, really, really pretty. And I really like the cream shades. Sometimes with palettes, the cream shades tend to crease on me. These ones don't. They're really nice. So I would be keeping this one. Okay, I only have 2 brands left. I have Shroud up next, and I would be keeping Betty Jean's first collab. It's freaking bats. I have both of her collabs. I like them both. This one, again, I think is a little more unique, and I really love the looks I've gotten out of this palette. I think it's so beautiful. I love the theme with the bats, with Halloween, with the spookiness. I think that's so fun. And these colors are so interesting, so unique, so different. The formula on these are so good. The mattes are pigmented yet blendable. These shimmers are some of my favorite shimmers where they're very smooth, but very shiny, very impactful. That is my favorite type of shimmer. Smooth, yet impactful. You know, I'm not a huge fan of ultra textured shadows all of the time. Like, I like them sometimes, but these ones, I'm always gonna be down for. So I would be choosing this one. And last but not least, we have one of my favorite brands, Unearthly Cosmetics. So I have a lot of palettes from Unearthly, and I was between 2, but I ended up choosing the Fall Magic palette. This palette, I think, is so, look at it. I swoon over this every time I see it. It is a fall themed palette, and it is very reminiscent of fall because it's got these colorful tones, but they're more muted. It's like they have a filter over them, like a fall filter. You know when fall comes and everybody's like taking pictures of their pumpkin spice latte and they've got that grainy filter where it makes everything a little more brown. That's what I'm feeling when I look at this. But the shimmers, so impactful, so beautiful. These shimmers are so different than any other Unearthly palette that I've personally tried. They're very wet, they're very, very sparkly, very shiny. Some of them are actually duochromes. And we have one up here, Cashmere, that's a little more on the subtle side. So I also like having variety in my palettes where I can have super sparkly, super shiny shimmers, but then I can also have ones that are a little more subdued if that's what I'm looking for. So this one is the one I would choose for Unearthly. All right, and that is it for this video. I hope you enjoyed it. Let me know your thoughts down below. I'm so glad that I was able to do an updated version of this. And I can also do the adverse version where I talk about the palette I would declutter if I had to declutter one palette from each brand. Let me know if you want to see that. I could definitely do that if you're interested in checking it out. I will link Nikki's video down below in the description box, and I will link the palettes I can link down below. And I want to hear from you now. Let me know your thoughts about these palettes. Have you tried them? Do you agree with me? Let me know your thoughts. I love hearing from you. And if you did enjoy this video, please give it a thumbs up. That helps me out a lot when you do that. And if you're not already subscribed to my channel, I would love it if you would consider subscribing before you leave. I do upload videos weekly, both beauty and fashion videos, and I would love to see you back on my channel again. I want to thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time. Bye.